The author says, may Allah have mercy upon him, وَالْحَاصِلُ أَنَّهُ يَجِبُ اعْتِقَادُ أَنَّ اللَّفْظَ الْمُنَزَّلَ حَادِثٌ مَخْلُوقٌ لِلَّهِ. The synopsis, that means the summary, is that it is obligatory to have the conviction that the revealed words are a creation of God. لكنه ليس من تأليف جبريل. However, it is not the authoring of Gabriel, ولا سيدنا Muhammad, nor of Master Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam. إنما هو شيء تلقفه جبريل. Rather, it is something that Gabriel took. بأن خلق الله حروفا مقطعة بنظم القرآن. By Allah creating letters, sequential letters, according to the arrangement of the Qur'an. Yani Allah created for him hearing the recitation of the Qur'an. Yani Allah created for Gabriel what the recitation of the Qur'an sounds like. It does not mean that Allah recited the Qur'an to Gabriel, that Allah Ta'ala pronounced the created letters of the Qur'an and Gabriel heard it. And it does not mean that Allah spoke this Qur'an with the uncreated speech and Gabriel understood how it's supposed to be, so he conveyed it to the Prophet according to its wording, because that would mean actually it is the authoring of Gabriel. فَتَلَاهُ عَلَى النَّبِيِّ صَلَّى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وَسَلَّمَ. So Gabriel, Allah created for him knowing how to recite the Qur'an. And then Gabriel recited it to the Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم. لكن لا يجوز أن يقال عن هذا اللفظ إنه مخلوق. However, it's not permissible to say about this wording, it is created, meaning it's not permissible to say while speaking about this wording, the Qur'an is created. إلا في مقام تعليم حذرا من اعتقاد الحادث قائما بذات الله. Except in an educational setting, one could say this wording is created, meaning he's being specific in the educational setting. He says the Quran, when it means the eternal attribute of God, it is not created, and when it refers to the wording and the phrases in Arabic, then they are created. To warn from believing that there is a creation that exists as an attribute of God, existing, yani confirmed for the self of God. To warn from believing in God having a created attribute confirmed for his self. وَعَلَى هَذَا التَّفْصِيلِ يُحْمَلُ كَلَامُ الشَّافِعِي. And according to this detail is taken the talk of Al-Shafi'i. أي قوله لحفص لما ناظره في هذه المسألة. Meaning, what Al-Shafi'i said to Hafs when he debated with him about this case. فَقَطَعَهُ بِالْحُجَّةِ. And then he silenced him with definitive arguments. وَأَصَرَّ حَفْصٌ عَلَى مُعْتَقَدِهِ وَقَوْلِهِ الْقُرْآنُ مَخْلُوقٌ. And Hafs insisted to stay steadfast upon his conviction and his saying that the Qur'an is created. So the meaning here is, Ash-Shafi'i clarified the issue for Hafs in such a way that he didn't leave any room for Hafs to say the Qur'an is created without falling into blasphemy. But he said it, and so Ash-Shafi'i said, لَقَدْ كَفَرْتَ بِاللَّهِ الْعَظِيمِ. You, by God, have disbelieved in God the Great. ويعني الشافعي بهذه العبارة أن ذلك كفر من حفص حقيقي. And what Ash-Shafi'i meant by this expression, you have by God disbelieved in God the Great, or that's my translation. When he said in Arabic, as reported from or about him, لَقَدْ كَفَرْتَ بِاللَّهِ الْعَظِيمِ. What he meant by this wording is that this is blasphemy, real blasphemy from Hafs, meaning Ash-Shafi'i made literal takfir on Hafs in his face. He told him what means you are a kafir, real one. وَلَا يَعْنِي الشَّافِعِيُّ بِذَلِكَ كُفْرَانَ النِّعْمَةِ. And Ash-Shafi'i does not mean or did not mean by this statement, you have been ungrateful for the endowment of Allah. كما زعم بعض الشافعية, as claimed by some Shafi'is. Who's that? One of the massive masters said that. Who's that? That's Al-Bayhaqi. Al-Bayhaqi, rahimahullah, he said, he explained the statement of Ash-Shafi'i. He made a ta'wil for the statement of Ash-Shafi'i. He explained it by other than how it appears. And he said the kufr that Ash-Shafi'i meant by this statement is kufranun ni'mah, ungratefulness. And this is rejected. Although the one who said it is Imam Al-Bayhaqi, rahimahullah. We say this statement is not regarded. Not that it has regard because Al-Bayhaqi said it, but that really it's thrown away, disregarded. It has zero regard because two things. One, Ash-Shafi'i said, لَقَدْ كَفَرْتَ بِاللَّهِ. He said, you have kafarta billah. That means you committed kufr in God. So that statement does not mean you have been unappreciative of the endowment of God. That's how Al-Bayhaqi is explaining it though. So we're saying doesn't mean that really. That's one thing. And also for another reason, for sure what Al-Bayhaqi said is not accurate. The Shaykh says, وَدَلَّ عَلَى ذَلِكَ قَوْلُ حَفْصٍ لَمَّا قَامَ مِنْ مَجْلِسِ الشَّافِعِي لِلرَّبِيعِ الْمُرَادِي. And what proves that, besides what I just told you, so here's the second thing, is what Hafs himself said, it's what Hafs understood, the one who's involved in the story. He said when he got up from the session with Ash-Shafi'i, he said to Al-Rabi' al-Muradi, أراد الشافعي قتلي. Ash-Shafi'i wanted me to be executed. Ash-Shafi'i wanted to get me executed. It's like he's saying, Ash-Shafi'i wanted to use his influence to have me executed. So does this mean that Hafs understands from Ash-Shafi'i's statement that Ash-Shafi'i is calling him ingrateful or ungrateful? No. He understands from this that Ash-Shafi'i is calling him a literal kafir, disbeliever, blasphemer, infidel, if you want. And also in some versions, Hafs said, أراد الشافعي ضرب عنقي. Ash-Shafi'i wanted me beheaded. Ash-Shafi'i wanted me beheaded. And the Shaykh gives a third one. So Shaykh gave two, I gave you one. He said, وَيَدُلُّ لِذَلِكَ أَيْضًا رِوَايَةُ الْحَافِظِ عَبْدِ الرَّحْمَنِ بْنِ أَبِي حَاتِمٍ عَنِ الرَّبِيعِ. And what proves that also is the rendition of Hafiz Abdul Rahman ibn Abi Hatim from Al-Rabi'. An-Nasafiyyah kafarah. Yani he said, Al-Shafi'i kafarahu. That means, Al-Shafi'i made takfir on him. So we're not going to say just because Al-Bayhaqi said it, it has regard. So that's the way of the people with little tahqiq, little exactness. That's the way of the one who takes a statement of a scholar only because he's a scholar and irregardless of any evidence, maybe because he doesn't know the evidence. Or even if he knew the evidence, he doesn't see that the statement of the scholar should be disregarded. And then this type of person, he hates us for disregarding the statement of a scholar when it's against the evidence. Yani, he hates for us to stay steadfast to the evidence and not to stay steadfast to a scholar because he's a scholar. So just for your clarification, so you're familiar with the word Kufr. You're familiar with the word Kufr, and what comes to your mind from this word is blasphemy or disbelief. Kufr is a source noun, So it is the source of verbs and adjectives. Verbs like kafara, he committed blasphemy, and yakfuru, he commits blasphemy or will commit blasphemy. And adjectives like kafir, he's blasphemer. So kufr is blasphemy. That's the source noun. Sometimes in Arabic a word has more than one source noun. In this case, this is one of those cases. So there's another source noun that means, like this word kufr that's familiar to you, that word is kufran. Kufran. It has the same pattern as the word Qur'an and the same pattern as the word subhan and the same pattern as the word ghufran. So these are all source nouns. This is one of the patterns of some source nouns. What does kufran mean? Kufran means kufr. Kufr means kufran. Kufran means kufr. Both of them are source nouns for what I told you. However, although in reality they do mean the same thing, the people use them differently. So when it comes to actual blasphemy and disbelief, the people would usually use the source noun kufr. And when it comes to ingratitude, the people usually use the source noun kufran, but they really mean the same thing and they have the same derivations. So you'd say kafara, that's past tense verb. Yakfur, that's present and future tense verb. And you'd say kufran, or kufranan, either one. Fahuwa kafir, therefore such a person is a kafir. Al-Bayhaqi, he explains the statement of Al-Shafi'i, لَقَدْ كَفَرْتَ بِاللَّهِ الْعَظِيمِ. So this word kafarta, that's the past tense verb. Al-Bayhaqi is saying this means you have committed kufran. We're saying it means you have committed kufr. And technically, those are both correct, but not according to the way people use them differently. And what Al-Bayhaqi meant was different from what we mean. So, inshallah, that's clear. If you have any question, feel free, please. قال ابن أبي بكر السعدي الحنبلي في كتابه الجوهر المحصل. Ibn Abi Bakr al-Sa'di, the Hanbali, said in his book Al-Jawhar al-Muhassal, وصح عن الإمام أحمد أنه كان يبدع من يقول بأن اللفظ بالقرآن غير مخلوق. It is authentic that Imam Ahmad used to deem a heretic anyone who says that the wording or the phrasing of the Quran is uncreated. قال العلامة ابن رجب في الطبقات. The savant Ibn Rajab said in Al-Tabaqat. So he's referring to Ibn Rajab as Allama. I'm translating Allama as savant, means like yani, super scholar. So if this is the Ibn Rajab I know, then we don't say he is that, but this is the quote of this speaker. So he said, the savant Ibn Rajab said in Al-Tabaqat, وَالصَّحِيحُ الصَّرِيحُ عَنْهُ أَنَّهُ كَانَ يُبَدِّعُ قَائِلَ ذَلِكَ. What is authentic and explicit from Imam Ahmad is that he used to deem a heretic anyone who said that. Intaha, end quote. وقال وقد روى ابن الجوزي عن الإمام أحمد رضي الله عنه أنه غضب غضبا شديدا على من نسب إليه رضي الله عنه أنه قال لفظي بالقرآن غير مخلوق. And Ibn al-Jawzi narrated about Imam Ahmad, may Allah accept from him, that he was extremely angry over or about someone attributing to him, may Allah accept from him, that he said, my wording of the Quran is uncreated. وَأَمَرَهُ بِأَن يَمْحُوَهُ أَشَدَّ الْمَحْوِ. And Imam Ahmad commanded that one to erase that as hard as he could, to erase it as hard as he could. Yani, that's hyperbolics, being emphatic here. Erase it hard, get rid of it. ومثله نقل الإمام البيهقي في الأسماء والصفات. And like that, Imam al-Bayhaqi logged in Al-Asma' was-Sifat أن الإمام أحمد كان ينكر هذه العبارة, that Imam Ahmad used to object to this word, this wording. وقال البخاري في كتابه خلق أفعال العباد. And Al-Bukhari said in his book, which is a booklet, خلق أفعال العباد, the creation of the deeds of the slaves. المعروف عن أحمد وأهل العلم أن كلام الله غير مخلوق. What is famous, what is known about Ahmad and the people of knowledge is that the speech of God is uncreated. وَمَا سِوَاهُ مَخْلُوقٌ. And anything else is created. Yani anything else means, in this topic, anything else means like any book, any pages, any ink, any sounds, it's all created. وَأَنَّهُمْ كَرِهُوا الْبَحْثَ وَالتَّنْقِيبَ عَنِ الْأَشْيَاءِ الْغَامِضَةِ. And that they used to dislike, yani they used to hate delving into the obscure issues. Yani the issues that are potentially confusing. Very important yani advice really there, if you want to follow their way, if you want to take that as an advice. I advise you, especially if you are a teacher, if you are a Shaykh, yani know the potentially confusing cases, in particular like cases of blasphemy. People ask you questions about blasphemy. Is this Kufr or is this Kufr? What's the judgment of who says this or that? I advise you to hate delving into the potentially confusing matters that relate to creed. Yani the matters that could set a person into misguidance and blasphemy and heresy. Yani if you are like that for these cases of blasphemy that people always ask, then you can understand what they don't like here, what these imams don't like here. At their time, there's a big controversy about the speech of God. Imagine the questions they're getting. What if somebody says this? What if somebody says that? What's the judgment of someone? So they would hate this indulging in the obscure issues, the ones that are like what I'm telling you, meaning the ones that are a door into misguidance and blasphemy. وَتَجَنَّبُوا أَهْلَ الْكَلَامِ, and they used to avoid the people of kalam. Here, like you know, inshallah, what's meant here is the heretics, the argumentative heretics. That's what's meant here by the people of kalam. This word kalam, when you see it, you need to put it into its proper context. Shaykh taught us about that. They used to avoid the argumentative heretics. That's what's meant here. They didn't go running after them, looking for debates with them. Some people always trying to get us to debate with those types of people. And those types of people, in their cowardice, they like do a general call out. Say, oh, you guys, I challenge any one of you, come and debate with me. But what they're not doing is, like, for example, going up to Shaykh Fulan or somebody. Like, if I want to speak for myself, like, they didn't come to me and say, I want to debate with you. Rather, they do a general thing and say, I'll debate with any one of you. And then when nobody wants to argue with them, they say, look, none of them stepped up for the challenge. And really, our case, may Allah grant us guidance, is that we are like those imams, alhamdulillah, in practice. We practice like them. وَتَجَنَّبُوا أَهْلَ الْكَلَامِ, they avoided the argumentative heretics. Doesn't mean they wouldn't refute them though. وَالْخَوْضَ وَالتَّنَازُعَ, and they used to avoid indulging, and they used to avoid dispute. إِلَّا فِي مَا جَاءَ فِيهِ الْعِلْمِ, except concerning anything that has firm knowledge. وَبَيَّنَهُ رَسُولُ اللَّهِ صَلَّى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وَسَلَّمَ, and anything that the Messenger of Allah clarified, then they stood firm in upholding it. Tanbih, notice. يتلخص مما ذكر أن الذين قالوا القرآن مخلوق من غير أن يعتقدوا أنه ليس لله كلام إلا ما يخلقه في غيره كالمأمون والمعتصم بالله فإنهما لم يساعد المعتزلة إلا على هذه العبارة القرآن مخلوق ولم يعتقد أنه ليس لله كلام إلا ما يخلقه في غيره كما هو معتقد المعتزلة فلا يتناول هؤلاء الخلفاء حكم الأئمة بالتكفير على من قال هذه العبارة. So this is a long sentence here. So let me break it up, and then if I translate it the way it's presented here, that means I'm going to get to the point after a few lines. So the Shaykh says, Tanbih, alert, notice. It is summarized from what has been mentioned that those who said the Qur'an is created, without believing though that God doesn't have any speech except what he creates and something else. So there are some people, they say this word, the Qur'an is created, and they don't believe, while saying this, that Allah doesn't have an attribute of speech. So you have two cases here. In both cases, someone says the Qur'an is created, but in one case, the one who says that believes. But in one case, the one who says that does not believe that God has an attribute called speech. And in another case, the one who says that does not deny that Allah has an attribute called speech. So we've already established this sentence, the Qur'an is created, is haram, you can't say it. There are two groups who say it though, who say this forbidden statement. One group who says it while believing that God does not have an attribute called speech. And another group who say this forbidden statement without denying that God has an attribute of speech. Those who say the Qur'an is created and they don't believe that God has an attribute called speech. Why is that significant here? Because they know that the word Qur'an has the meaning of speech. So what they're saying is there is a speech attributed to God. There's a speech attributed to God, but it's not an eternal attribute. Rather, it's something that he creates in something else. And we're going to call that God's speech. This speech that he creates in some creature, according to them, we're going to call that God's speech. And otherwise, he doesn't have an eternal uncreated speech. And we're going to say the Qur'an is created. So that's blasphemy. Some people didn't go that far. They did say the Qur'an is created, but they didn't deny that Allah has an uncreated speech. كَالْمَأْمُونِ وَالْمُعْتَصِمِ بِاللَّهِ. Like one caliph whose name was Al-Ma'mun, and another caliph whose name was Al-Mu'tasim Billah. Two caliphs. These two, they did not assist the Mu'tazila in this issue except by saying this phrase. They didn't go further than the words of this phrase as far as deviant conviction. So they did say, Al-Qur'anu makhluq, the Qur'an is created. And saying this was an assistance for the Mu'tazila, but they didn't used to believe like the Mu'tazila. They didn't believe that Allah does not have a speech except something that he creates in some creature of his, which was the conviction of the Mu'tazila. So these caliphs are not included in the judgment of the Imams who make takfir, who deem as kafir someone who says this statement, the Qur'an is created. We talked about this last time. So, what do we say about the sentence Al-Qur'anu makhluq? We say hukmuhu haram. Its judgment is that it is forbidden. It's not kufr by itself. It's not kufr. It's haram. But are there some scholars who said whoever says the Qur'an is created is a kafir? Yes, there are. So maybe someone will say, you don't accept those either, huh? Those ones, they're wrong too. Everybody's wrong, but you guys. The answer is here, they're not wrong because here, when they said it, they had something in mind. We're saying it's not kufr by itself. So we're not considering what they had in mind. And we agree with them, though, that if what they have in mind is there, then it is kufr to say it. It would be kufr if someone, he believes that God doesn't have an attribute of speech. So that's kufr by itself without saying any sentence. To say God does not have an attribute called speech, kalam, that's blasphemy without saying any sentence. But when a person has this conviction and he adds to that a sentence, and he adds on top of having this kufr conviction a statement, then when he says this statement, the Qur'an is created, while he holds that conviction, he adds blasphemy to his blasphemy. So we agree that that would be blasphemy while holding this conviction. So really what we're saying is the accurate rule, that this statement is blasphemy when someone has the conviction that Allah doesn't have the attribute of kalam. Some scholars said, whoever says the Qur'an is created, he's a kafir. And they meant what I just told you. So these caliphs are not included in the judgment of those imams who made a charge of blasphemy on someone who says this sentence. Al-Qur'an makhluq. فبطل ما زعمه بعض الناس. So debunked is what some people have claimed. من الاحتجاج لترك تكفير المعتزلة بما حصل للخليفة المأمون. Their claim is to deny a charge of blasphemy against all Mu'tazila merely for what happened to the Caliph Al-Ma'mun وَمَنْ تَبِعَهُ مِنَ الْخُلَفَاءِ الْعَبَّاسِيِّينَ, and any Abbasid caliphs who followed him. من موافقة المعتزلة على هذه العبارة, those caliphs who agreed with the Mu'tazila in this word, not in their conviction, only in this phrase. So we're not going to deem these caliphs as kuffar for this phrase, but that's not a proof that none of the Mu'tazila are kuffar for this phrase, because those Mu'tazila had a conviction that these caliphs didn't have. So that when they said this phrase, they committed kufr, and when these caliphs said the same phrase, they didn't commit kufr. فتبين أن قول الأئمة منصب على المعتزلة القائلين بأنه ليس لله كلام إلا ما يخلقه في غيره. And so it became clear that the talk of the Imams applies, the charge of blasphemy applies to the Mu'tazila who say that God does not have any speech. There's nothing that you could call the speech of God except something that he creates in some creature of his. That's blasphemy. وإطلاقهم القول بأن القرآن مخلوق على هذا الوجه. Those Mu'tazila, when they say the Qur'an is created, they are saying it in this way. You said the individual that says that the Qur'an is created and didn't deny that Allah has uncreated speech would be referring to the revelation when they said that the Qur'an was created. Yes. So you can't call him a kafir for that. But the statement is haram according to the scholars of Ahlus Sunnati wal Jama'ah. والمعتزلي الذي يقول هذه المقالة والذي يقول بأن العباد يخلقون أفعالهم الاختيارية مستقلين بإيجادها. And so any Mu'tazili who says this phrase, or he says this saying, which is the blasphemy, and the one who says the slaves create their own voluntary deeds independent of God's creating. They independently create their own voluntary deeds. وَإِنَّ اللَّهَ كَانَ قَادِرًا عَلَىٰ أَنْ يَخْلُقَ أَفْعَالَ الْعِبَادِ قَبْلَ أَنْ يُعْطِيَهُمُ الْقُدْرَةَ عَلَيْهَا. And those Mu'tazila who say that God used to have power over creating the actions of his slaves before giving them power over their own deeds. وَبَعْدَ أَنْ أَعْطَاهُمُ الْقُدْرَةَ عَلَيْهَا صَارَ عَاجِزًا عَنْ خَلْقِهَا. And then after he gave them power over their own deeds, he became disabled from creating them. Kafirun qat'a. Such a Mu'tazili would be a disbeliever definitively. لكن لا يكفر الواحد من المعتزلة لمجرد انتسابه إليهم. However, an individual would not be deemed as a disbeliever. An individual would not be deemed as a disbeliever for merely affiliating with the Mu'tazila. إلا أن تثبت عليه قضية معينة يكفر معتقدها. he wouldn't be deemed as a kafir unless it is confirmed about him any particular case that's blasphemy for someone to believe. And that's general for all deviant groups. If someone says, I'm a Qadiani, I'm a Murji'i, or something, or I'm a Salafi, just by affiliating with the deviant sect, that's not enough to deem him as a kafir on a personal level, that individual. Even though we believe that the group in general is a disbelieving group, but we cannot deem the individual who presents himself as a Muslim and it's not confirmed about him any particular blasphemous case, but he affiliates himself with a blasphemous sect. It's not permissible to deem him as a kafir. لأن منهم من ينتسب إليه منتسابا, because some of those individuals are merely affiliated. ولا يوافقهم إلا في بعض مقالاتهم التي هي غير كفر. And these affiliates do not agree with the group in all of their sayings. They might agree with them only in some sayings that don't reach the level of blasphemy. وأما إطلاق القول بأن المعتزلة ضلال غير كفار, but concerning saying merely that the Mu'tazila are misguided and not blasphemers, فَبَعِيدٌ مِنَ الصَّوَابِ, that's far from being correct. فكيف يتردد في تكفير من يقول إن الله لا يقدر على أن يخلق مقدور العباد بعد أن أعطاهم القدرة عليها? How would there be hesitation? How would there be hesitation about deeming as a kafir someone who says that God does not have power to create what is under the control of his slaves after giving them power over it? هكذا حقق القول في أمر المعتزلة الحافظ الفقيه شيخ الإسلام سراج الدين عمر بن رسلان البلقيني. This is how the hadith headmaster and the jurist and the Shaykh of Islam Sirajuddin Umar ibn Raslan al-Bulqini verified the judgment. What we are saying here, that's kufr, what's kufr and what's not kufr here, this is the way al-Bulqini went. وقال الحافظ الفقيه الحنفي محمد مرتضى الزبيدي في شرح إحياء علوم الدين. And the hadith headmaster and the Hanafi jurist. This is how the Hanafi jurist Muhammad Murtada az-Zabidi, he said in the explanation of Ihya Ulumuddin, ما نصه, quote, ولذلك لم يتوقف علماء ما وراء النهر في تكفير المعتزلة. For that reason, the scholars beyond the river, that's the river of Jayhun, the scholars beyond the river of Jayhun, so that's out of the Arab lands. These are Hanafis and Maturidis. They never stopped deeming the Mu'tazila as blasphemers. حيث جعلوا التأثير للإنسان, because the Mu'tazila give effect to the human. This means they believe the human creates. Yani, they believe the human affects in reality. Intaha, end quote. When we say the human doesn't affect in reality, means he doesn't create. So, for example, if you're driving your car, so you put your hand on the steering wheel and you turn your steering wheel right and left, you don't affect the turning of the steering wheel in reality. You don't create it. Allah creates it. And when you push down on the pedal, the gas pedal or the brake pedal, you don't affect the movement of the pedal in reality. Allah creates it. Wallahu a'lam. Let's stop there. So Allah knows best. Any question?
So, anytime we hear someone say that the Quran is created, we should ask them what do they mean about that.
You don't have to ask him, but what you can do is say, this is not explicit blasphemy, so I can't call him a kafir.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to ask him to get to the bottom of it, you could ask him. And if you want to leave it alone so you don't have to deal with it, you could say, I can't deem him as a kafir. You might say to him, don't say this, haram. Okay. Haram, say the statement, don't say it. So you bid the good and forbid the evil. And then you don't have to ask him. If he offers for you whatever he wants to say, then that's on him. Because if you didn't ask him, he doesn't have to say anything.
Okay. So just leave it. Usually, I ask the person, like, "What do you mean by that?" I don't understand, and they tell me, they tell me the correct way. This book that Allah created, that was revealed to us, is created. I said, okay, I understand what you're saying. All right,
yeah.
Now go from there. All right.
Yeah, and then if you want, if it's, you might be obligated since this is haram, you'd say to him, don't say that though.
Okay, I'll make sure I say that part then. All right.
Ameen wa fiik. But yeah, I didn't think about it because it goes back to the rules of bidding the good and forbidding the evil. If you open the door to tell him this is haram, don't say it, is it going to get worse from there? If you anticipate it's going to get worse from there, leave it alone. Subhanaka Allahumma wa bihamdik. أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك